Hey, what's up, listener? Thank you so much for clicking on the Cannabis Man podcast. Welcome to the show. My name is Don Kleppen. I am your host, and I have a packed episode to get to this week, listener. My guest, who you'll hear from in the interview, she is the widow of a very well-known hash maker, Frenchie Cannoli. He unfortunately died last year, but before he did, he contributed so much to the cannabis community at large. He traveled around the world learning the classic hash farming techniques, forming as well, and also found a way of elevating those classic techniques and was sharing some of what he knew with the cannabis community at large. And his widow is now continuing his work. She is running some of these hashish workshops for anybody interested in learning more about it. And one of those workshops is coming to Illinois, as is the screening of a documentary which was made about her husband, Frenchie. It's called Frenchie Dreams of Hashish, and it is going to be screened around Chicago this month. I'm going to tell you how you can get tickets to that, as well as how you can sign up for some of those hash workshops if you're at all interested in that. Also, we got the news joint wrap, some other news headlines and events coming up around Illinois, and something I wanted to get to as well, a news article that crossed my feed that I wanted to share with you. Of course, we also have the strain of the week, and got to kick it off with my cannabis and coffee. But before we do that, let's launch the show off properly here with the open on this 21st episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Here we go. That's that theme right there. That Cannabis Man theme song you just heard, listener, was written and composed by my friend Yusu Kim, a.k.a. Good Son, and you can check him out on Instagram or Twitter at I Am a Good Son, and find out some more of the great music that he cranks out on a regular basis. Before I get into the Illinois News Joint Wrap, listener, you know I love starting my day with cannabis and coffee. The coffee in that mix today is the Blonde Roast from Starbucks. Picked up a little pack of that recently and just made it this morning in the drip coffee maker, and am sipping on that right now. Quite tasty. And the cannabis, the strain of the week, part of my cannabis and coffee regimen to start my day today and this week has been Rebel Sour. It's also known as Rebel Sour 2.0. This is officially listed as a hybrid strain that's made by crossing Sour OG and East Coast Sour Diesel. I'm looking at leafly.com. As you know, I like to sometimes, listener, talking about these strains, leafly.com. The reviewers on Leafly say the strain makes them feel the top effect is happy, and they say their flavor and aroma is diesel. It definitely is. Smelling it, you do kind of get the diesel. This is not a fruity strain, even with the sour sort of name there of the strain. There's no real fruit here, and there's no sweetness, there's no sourness. What you really kind of get is motor breath kind of diesel flavor from it. However, the top effect reported again is feeling happy. There's also talkative and energetic. So even though this is labeled as a hybrid, myself personally, and based on these reviews, definitely leans more towards sativa than the indica style, which, as you know, listener, I kind of vibe with myself. Sativa is more of just aligns with what I like to do during the day. I grabbed this strain of Rebel Sour from my local Sunnyside at Wrigleyville, that location, and the form that this flower is taking is in some pre-rolls. I grabbed a pack of those dog walkers you may be familiar with, listener, a pack of 5 5 smaller joints. They're usually around half a gram each, maybe 0.35 even, and they're really only about 10 hits or so, take you about 10 minutes to kind of burn through, and it's just a nice little small elevation to get you through the day. I find that keeping a pack of these dog walkers within reach really keeps my days moving smoothly. So this is a pre-roll of Rebel Sour, the sativa-leaning hybrid that is the Cannabis in my cannabis and coffee regimen starting today. Yep. Oh, yeah. Lovely. That is lovely. Let's give it up for Rebel Sour. Yeah. Yeah, that's good stuff. All right, and now it's time to get into the Illinois News Joint Wrap. That's right, this is the News Joint Wrap, some news headlines and events around Illinois that have happened or are coming up that I like to share with you, and it's all brought to you by the Illinois News Joint, IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Think of it as the joint you can hit for all your Illinois cannabis news and reviews. Let's start with Illinois adult use cannabis sales, which have already, here in September, passed $1 billion with a B dollars for the year in Illinois. Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation announced August's recreational sales totals last week. The total cannabis sales last month did not keep pace with the record sales set in July of $135 million over that. August sales dipped slightly to $129,441,315.80. It's above the 2022 monthly average, which is sitting at around $127 million per month right now. However, with August sales totals factored in, Illinois has now crossed the $1 billion mark with an 8-month total of $1,015,700,000. Important to note here that cannabis sales have been on a pretty much steady climb since January of 2020. I'm looking at this article on IllinoisNewsJoint.com, listener, which has a very convenient list all the way back to 2020, each month and the sales totals. And if you go back to January of 2020, you'll see that recreational cannabis sales for Illinois totaled at just under 40 million, 39,247,000. And then starting in May, it really starts to creep upward. And you'll look at December of 2021 compared with that January number of just under 40 million. December of 2021, 137,896,000, just about 138. So you're talking about almost 4 times the amount of sales in December of 2021 compared with January of 2020. So I only get into all the weeds of these numbers and this math, listener, to illustrate that Illinois has seen a pretty steady climb from January of 2020 to right now. I mean, even last month, August, which, as we said, was a bit of a dip from July, 130 million compared with just about 40 million. You're looking still at about 3 times that number less than 3 years later. So cannabis sales, recreational adult use cannabis sales in Illinois are on a steady incline, and that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. Frenchie Dreams of Hashish premiere date is set for Illinois, and the workshop, as I mentioned at the top there, listener, the Frenchie Cannoli Foundation and his widow, cannabis activist Kimberly Hooks, are hosting 2 major events in Illinois. The first event is the Illinois premiere of the documentary I mentioned, listener, Frenchie Dreams of Hashish. That premiere is set for September 23rd. So you got about 2 weeks from today when this episode comes out, the 7th, to get your tickets. There's a link for those at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. It'll premiere the documentary that night once the sun goes down. As you'll hear in the interview, and as I mentioned, listener, Hashishin master Frenchie Cannoli passed away a little over a year ago, and he was a California-based teacher, consultant, artisan, and activist dedicated to the production and appreciation of traditional cannabis concentrates. The following day, September 24th, Aroma Grow Store, which specializes in indoor gardening, organic gardening, microgreens, and sustainable living, they are going to host the Lost Art of the Hashishin all-day workshop. Anybody participating will spend the day learning the ancient technique of sieving, but with a modern twist of using an inexpensive mini washer. Now, you'll hear a little bit about this, listener, in some more detail in the interview coming up with Kimberly Hooks. She kind of talks a little bit about that process, and this, what she's describing, that's what you'd be learning during this Hashishin workshop at Aroma Grow Store on September 24th. It also includes lectures about the science behind the process, live demonstration, lunch is also included, and then a lesson on the process of pressing, storing, and aging hash. Tickets for this once-in-a-lifetime event are selling fast. Space is filling up. It starts at 9 a.m. and will run until 5 p.m. Again, you can find tickets for that, as well as the documentary premiere of Frenchie Dreams of Hashish, all at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. And one final story on the News Joint wrap here, listener. This is a bit of a sad story and kind of bizarre that came out of the Chicago area on Monday, Labor Day. The headline reads, "Axe-wielding man shot dead outside a Zen Leaf dispensary." You may have heard about this, listener, maybe not, but the Chicago Police and Fire Departments reported on Monday that around 10:05 in the morning, a man wielding an axe allegedly attacked a security guard at the Zen Leaf in the West Loop, also known as the Greektown area of Chicago, after an argument with the 37-year-old security guard who was on duty. And again, if you haven't been in the Chicago dispensaries, listener, or maybe all of Illinois, I'm not 100% sure here, but I believe all of the dispensaries in Illinois, the private ones, have armed security guards on scene. All the ones that I've gone to at Sunnyside and Rise, all of those have armed guards, and I have to imagine Zen Leaf are the same story. Anyway, both the alleged attacker and the security guard were hospitalized. The attacker was pronounced dead at the hospital. The security guard was treated for the cut with that axe on his left leg. He's reported to be in good condition, that security guard. But again, this axe wielder who attacked the guard is now dead. So I just wanted to throw that out there for you, listener. I thought it was a relevant news story that happened in the Illinois area, and just remember that pertinent information there if you start to see this headline or this story perk up in the national news headlines or in different markets. If somebody tries to point at it to further their narrative or because they might have an anti-cannabis agenda, you know that this is sort of a bizarre circumstance, and I'll just put a pin in this here by saying I feel very comfortable making the declaration that cannabis does not cause violent behavior the same way that playing violent video games doesn't cause these school shootings and such. People like to try and point at those things and create a correlation or a causality there. There is none. And I just wanted to point that out because if you start to see this come up in the next few weeks, I just want you to remember that too. And that'll conclude this edition of the Illinois News Joint Wrap. Remember, you can get tickets for all the events I mentioned and find out more information about any of those topics at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Listener, my next guest has a very interesting story. She has been involved in the cannabis scene for a while and has sort of a tragic event, I should say, last year. And she has continued to keep the work that her late husband, who was a big advocate for cannabis and a major trailblazer in the field of hash and just cannabis in general. And she's here to tell us a little about what her journey's been like and what is going on now as cannabis is kind of changing right before our very eyes in this world. Listener, please welcome Kimberly Hooks. Welcome, Kimberly.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you, and thanks for jumping on. So, admittedly, I kind of wasn't sure the best way to introduce you, mainly because of the story of your husband, which everybody is still thinking of him, and he passed away last year, I believe. Would you mind sharing with the listener, in case they don't know, a little about your husband and what he did?
Yes, absolutely. But Frenchie would be the first to say that we shouldn't miss him with sadness, that he had a very full and rich life, and he achieved everything that he wanted to do. And he would just want you to remember his energy and passion for the plant, his love for dancing, and his love for smoking everybody out at cannabis events. So for those of you who don't know, my husband was Frenchie Cannoli, the hash maker, who spent 8 seasons up in the mountains of the Himachal Pradesh, learning to hand rub cannabis concentrate there in the form that's known locally as charas. He also worked with Afghan refugees in New Delhi who were there because they couldn't be young people that had left their own country during the Soviet invasion, and learned dry sift technology from them, as well as from travels to Morocco a number of times. He was here in California the last 20 years and was, I think, a well-beloved figure at many cannabis events where he would bring his multi-hose hookah and share some of the hashish, traditional hashish that he was making, both early on during the medical days when we were working with scripts and patients, and then later when things transitioned into the so-called legal market, and we worked with a couple of manufacturing facilities for a short period of time. But I think the thing that was most surprising and meaningful to him these last few years was when he started passing on the traditions, as he liked to call it, to the younger generation and to anybody who wanted to learn. Because, as he said, the information, the knowledge had been shared with him very generously when he was working with traditional cultures in northern India, with his Afghan friends in New Delhi, and with other people around the world. And so he felt it was almost like a human responsibility to share information about the plant and how beneficial the relationship is and how far back it goes, given that we evolved together, both plant and human, from the same single cell source. And that he used to say, when you look at the plant kingdom and all the various plants that are out there, and of the 200 or so that are actually viable for human consumption, that cannabis is the only plant that takes 2 substances that singularly they are toxic, meaning cannabinoids and terpenes, phenol and terpenes, and combines those and produces a product that has these cannabinoids that are made to fit our endocannabinoid system, so that we have this huge, long, primordial shared history with each other. He was a great advocate of the plant and of traditional hash making.
What was something that Frenchie brought when he was educated, and obviously it was very important to him to share the knowledge that he learned and pass it on? What about what he learned in making hash, what was something that he felt was sort of critically important that it gave to people as to why he wanted to share it?
I think the big revelation for him was reading a research paper where they pointed out that the trichome head is made like a fruit to fall at maturity, that there's an abscission at the stalk and the head, between the stalk and the head of the trichome, and that as the head becomes fuller and fuller with the resin, that abscission point narrows. And then, like fruit, at its natural maturity, it will just fall off, because there were certain schools of thought, especially in ice water sieving, that said you needed to put a lot of ice in the water because the ice was then used almost to shear the head from the stalk. And Frenchie pointed out that this was an error, that you just needed cold water, that you didn't even really need ice, and that the whole genius behind using water as a vehicle for the seeding process was that it creates a vortex that gently massages the head from the stalk, almost as if you were in a river with water flowing over you. And so this allows you as a hash maker to then create dimensions of ripeness, as he termed it, so that just like with a fruit tree, the first time you shake the tree, you're going to get the ripest fruit. And in many cases, that'll be the fruit that's actually a little overripe. And then you'll do another shake and you'll get another dimension of ripeness. And you'll keep shaking the tree until there's no fruit left on the tree. And as people, manufacturers, or even private people, making hash for themselves using a little mini washer, everybody can do this. And then you have different profiles actually within those dimensions of ripeness that can be used therapeutically differently. So a profile of a plant material that's a little overripe that might have been exposed to a little bit longer UV ray intensity, it might be higher in CBN once you've processed it. And this is a good thing for people who are dealing with insomnia or need some relaxation if they're dealing with an illness, whereas something that's less ripe, is going to have a very distinctly different cannabinoid profile from that and might be used, for example, for more concentration or so, we're learning more and more about how these cannabinoid profiles differ, as well as the therapeutic use of the terpenes that the different cultivars offer us.
Right. And that is, that's one of the things that I find so exciting about right now is just kind of what we are finding out. This plant has been used by humans for so many thousands of years. And as you mentioned, kind of at the top, we've evolved together with it. But at the same time, because of the prohibition of it, there hasn't been the same kind of research that's been done on other substances that we use, like alcohol, like tobacco. So finding out the specifics of what symptoms are experienced by the different cannabinoids, people who use them, that to me is so fascinating, and I just love learning more about that. The technique of hash making, for those who don't know, kind of how, just basically, sort of, if you can, how does it go from the bud on the plant? How does it get from there to the hash form?
So the trichome on the plant cover the leaf surface, and they're a defense mechanism against predators. And they also work as a kind of air conditioning system for the plant in areas that have higher heat intensity. And that's where the resin is found. So in order to remove that, first of all, you need them to be ripe, as I mentioned previously. But then you use one of the most traditional methodologies that humans discovered probably when they were first thinking about how to efficiently separate seeds from in larger quantity than just like hand picking them off one by one. So they used a technique that was available to them because they also used the technique to make clothing, and that was weaving.
Right.
They discovered that they could put a piece of cloth that was not so tightly woven across some kind of form, and that by putting the material that had the seeds that they want to separate on the leaves or the stems of the plant and shaking it over this, they could either, there's a couple methodologies. There's one where you flip it up and the lighter material is kind of moved away through the air and the heavier seeds fall back down onto the seed. And then with cannabis, because the trichomes are very, very small, generally you use a frame that looks more like a bed frame, and you gently rub the leaf material over the surface, and then the trichomes will fall through the material onto a clean receptacle or a clean cloth underneath your your structure.
Mm.
Or in Morocco, they take a large metal bowl, and they put a cloth in it, and then they put the sieving material on the cloth, and then they put another cloth over the type, and they stretch it tight almost like a drum, and they use wooden sticks to tap, and this creates friction for the leaf material to be bounced up and down. And again, the trichomes will separate from the plant material and fall through the lower level of material into the clean surface of the bowl underneath.
That's interesting. Okay, so that's how they kind of get the best trichomes, or like the purest material from the plant itself. And then is there
that was the traditional technique of doing it. And the challenge there is that in one receptacle, you're doing both the agitation, meaning bouncing the material up and down, and the separation, meaning taking the trichome head from the stalk. Unfortunately, when you're bouncing the material up and down, because it's dried material, and dry material is brittle, you also are creating leaf matter contaminants. Little tiny pieces of the leaf matter are breaking up into approximately the same size as the trichome heads, so you end up with pretty clean material in the traditional manner, but there could be some leaf matter that has also bounced into the mixture because it was the same size as the trichomes.
Right. That makes sense.
Kind of, Frenchie used to say the only modern evolution to this process was the introduction of water, because with the introduction of water, we separated the process into two steps. We agitated the material in the water, and if we had correctly rehydrated the material in the water, we wouldn't be creating that leaf matter contamination. Like I said previously, we would be using the water just to gently massage the heads from the stalks. We wouldn't be breaking up a bunch of the leaf matter.
Right.
And then we would drain the bags we would drain the water with the trichomes in it separately into the bags, where we would do the sieving process, which would allow us to do a secondary rinse of that material. And if you know what you're doing, you can run the trichomes up this side of the bag and rinse away any potential leaf matter contamination that has filtered in the water to the bags with the trichomes.
Wow.
So this was kind of a really important step in modern sieving methodology, because it separated those two processes, which allowed us to make a much cleaner product.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds like a sort of a revelation, actually. I mean, if that was the well-established way of doing it, and there was still this tiny, like, little bits of contaminants from the leaf matter, this new methodology seems like a pretty big development to be able to rid them of that using water.
Absolutely.
So there is there's a documentary film that's coming out about Frenchie, about I'm assuming the education, his life, and what he did, and that's going to be shown in different areas, and that includes coming up here in the Chicago area. Can you talk a little about the documentary and when it's going to be shown in this area?
We hope to bring it to Chicago on the 15th.
Nice.
Yes, this is a film that the filmmaker followed Frenchie for a 3-year period that covered the transition from medical to adult use in California, and showed how that negatively impacted the legacy farmers of Northern California that had been holding this tradition alive for so many years.
Wow, that's amazing. And so what are you most excited about to share in terms of the documentary? Like, what are you excited for people who don't know of Frenchie's legacy? What are you excited about them learning?
Frenchie was very charismatic and had a deep connection with the plants and with the farmers, and that really shows up wonderfully in the film. I think it's very inspirational for people who have been doing quietly their own work in their own, the privacy of their own kitchen or their basement, to realize that they're part of this larger cannabis community, and to follow the lead, to be able to be inspired by somebody like Frenchie, who helped normalize, the use of traditional hashish in North America, and who had a lot of bravery around saying very strongly that he was an advocate for the plant and that the plant was a good thing, a beneficial thing, not something to be afraid of, and absolutely nothing to do with the way that it was portrayed during the war on drugs, as if it was something that, caused insanity or
yeah, right. All that racist fear-mongering that they put out, yes.
Yeah. So it's just a lovely tribute of Frenchie to the plant and to his farmers, and a cautionary tale to a degree of what not to do as an emerging market when working with your legacy farmers who have established this in, various countries and states and really have a deep knowledge of what it takes to grow good cannabis and process excellent cannabis, which is unfortunately not what we're seeing with some of the so-called legal markets. When we look at what's happened in California and Canada with large money coming in thinking that this was a cash crop that they were going to exploit and not having any experience with the plant, it's shown up very much in the results that they've achieved because they have not, kind of worked with legacy producers or really tapped into the knowledge of the legacy community. The results have been pretty dismal.
Yeah, they have, and I'm glad you brought that up too. I know that, I've mentioned on the show before that basically Canada is, they had an opportunity, it was an exciting thing for them to announce legalization in certain provinces, and then basically they have, as you said, they have not talked with the legacy cultivators. They also didn't squash the black market. There was a lot that they did wrong, and now it's basically like I shouldn't say it's failed. There still exists a market, but it is nowhere near what it could be, and what we're seeing in some other states who are U.S. states that are kind of doing things a little bit differently. One final thing before I kind of wrap it up here, Kimberly, I just wanted to know, do you think we're, as a country in the U.S., states are doing things differently, but do you think that we're on the right track with how the federal government's approaching cannabis? Do you there's some talk that maybe the Safe Banking Act will actually pass before the year is out so that there can be some federal regulation. It's still not going to be fully decriminalized. It probably won't be legalized for a bit, but what's your opinion of how the U.S. is kind of handling cannabis as an emerging market?
I think it's not. It's still federally illegal, so it's not. And what's been proposed is not adequate to the needs of the people. And until they do something to get everybody out of prison who has been incarcerated for a cannabis crime, it's not satisfactory. And that should be above all the primary focus, because if you have large corporations of people who were previous against cannabis that now sit on the boards of these companies that are having a big influence on the markets and have created the problem, there should be no reason for keeping people incarcerated for cannabis crimes. It's a waste of public money, and if other people can profit from it, then those people should be freed, because now the mindset around that has obviously changed, and what they've done in the current environment is no longer criminal. So we need to get those people out of prison. That should be the biggest focus.
Right, and well said. I totally agree. It's ridiculous that we're living in a world where this product is now sold legally, and people who did that are still behind bars. It's a joke, and so I agree that is something that should be top of mind in terms of changing immediately. The first things that got to change is get those people out. Kimberly Hooks, thank you so much for joining the show. Listener, look for the documentary on Frenchie Cannoli. What's the title of the documentary, Kimberly?
The title is called Frenchie Dreams of Hashish.
Frenchie Dreams of Hashish. So keep an eye out, listener, for that. That's going to be making the rounds and screening in different markets. If you can, get to one of those showings, highly recommend it. It's being well received, and it's an inspirational story of somebody who was a trailblazer for the cannabis industry and someone who moved it forward a lot while it was still heavily prohibited. And it's a story worth hearing. And thank you, Kimberly, for continuing the good work, and thanks for jumping on the show today and sharing your perspective.
My pleasure. All the best.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And there it is. Remember, listener, you can get tickets for the documentary premiere in Illinois of Frenchie Dreams of Hashish, and you can sign up for that workshop to learn the science behind and the methods behind harvesting hash at the Aroma Grow store, and you can get tickets for that workshop and for the documentary premiere at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Before I let you go this week, listener, I wanted to get a quick edition of
The Marijuana Logs.
Yeah. That's right. This is the Marijuana Logs, and it's just a real quick one today. I saw a headline that I thought was worth your attention because over the last few weeks, we have been hearing people talk about the ability of long-term cannabis users, or rather the lost ability to apparently enjoy life's pleasures or to become motivated to do anything, feeding into the lazy stoner stereotype and just people sort of bringing up these negative possibilities, which, again, we don't know about because the research hasn't been done to confirm this. But Cambridge University just put out a study. The headline reads, "Cannabis users no less likely to be motivated or able to enjoy life's pleasures. They show no difference in motivation for rewards, pleasure taken from those rewards, or the brain's response when seeking rewards compared to non-users." Cannabis, again, according to Cambridge, I'll share this link on the show social so you can check this out. And again, I do want to talk to somebody about this, but I just thought that this headline alone, that there's no correlation between a lack of motivation or an inability to enjoy life's pleasures. There is no correlation with that and smoking cannabis, long-time use of cannabis. Moving down in the article here, a common stereotype of cannabis users is the stoner. Think Jesse Pinkman in Breaking Bad, the dude in The Big Lebowski, or more recently, Argyle in Stranger Things. Hey, right on. There are individuals who are generally depicted as lazy and apathetic. I think we all can conjure our own favorite, caricature of the lazy stoner. I would like to submit for your consideration Brad Pitt's character in True Romance, the 90s Tarantino movie. If you haven't seen Brad Pitt playing that stoner, I highly, highly recommend you go and check it out. He's got about 2 or 3 scenes in the movie, but he has a unique little honey bear contraption to smoke out of, and his character is just hilarious. But anyway, that's a common stereotype. We've all seen it in various forms. At the same time, there's been considerable concern, back to the article, of the potential impact of cannabis use on the developing brain, and that using cannabis during adolescence might have a damaging effect at an important time in an individual's life. That is a legitimate concern. Alcohol, nicotine, even too much sugar. We know what kind of negative impact those things can have on a developing adolescent. If you introduce a substance, even one as naturally occurring and as co-evolved with, from humans' perspective, as co-evolved with as cannabis, if you introduce that to a developing mind too young, I think it makes sense. Again, we don't have confirming research here. We are starting to see a growing body, but we don't know for sure. But I think, my opinion, is that it makes sense if you introduce a substance into a developing brain that there may be negative long-term impacts of that. And it's one of the reasons why I've mentioned, listener, I'm very grateful that I didn't really start smoking or was introduced to it at all until I was in my adult years, until I was 20, 21. That's when it became a regular thing for me. Still maybe a developing brain, and hey, maybe one day I'll find out that I really screwed up my short-term memory or something by doing that. But we don't know that for sure yet. There's no confirmed science backing that up. But that being said, the fear is there, the concerns are there. And a team led by scientists at UCL, the University of Cambridge, and the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology, and Neuroscience at King's College London carried out a study examining whether cannabis users show higher levels of apathy, which is a loss of motivation, and anhedonia, a loss of interest or pleasure from rewards, when compared to controls, and whether they were less willing to exert physical effort to receive a reward. The research was part of the Canteen study, and the results are published in the International Journal of Neuropsychopharmacology. They recruited 274 adolescent and adult cannabis users who had used at least weekly over the past 3 months, with an average of 4 days a week, and matched them with non-users of the same age and gender. Participants completed questionnaires to measure anhedonia, asking them to rate statements such as, quote, "I would enjoy being with family or close friends." They also completed questionnaires measuring their levels of apathy, which asked them to rate characteristics such as how interested they were in learning new things, or how likely they were to see a job through to the end. Cannabis users scored slightly lower than non-users on anhedonia. In other words, they appeared better able to enjoy themselves, but there was no significant difference when it came to apathy. Researchers also found no link between frequency of cannabis use and either apathy or anhedonia in those who used cannabis. In general, adolescents tended to score higher than adults on anhedonia and apathy in both user and non-user groups, but cannabis use did not augment the difference. So that's all I'm going to read about this, listener, but you can see here where this headline, is going, where this article, what the study found. There is no significant difference in the ability of motivating yourself or enjoying life's pleasures, the way that some people might try and depict such a difference in cannabis users. The lazy stoner stereotype, the person who is apathetic, couch-ridden, cannot get themselves to enjoy anything, that is a manufactured misconception. That is a Hollywood-concocted character for entertainment and nothing more. And this article out of Cambridge and King's College London, which looked at almost 300 adolescents comparing users and non-users, found no correlation between cannabis use, regular cannabis use. We're talking at least 4 days a week for the past 3 months. That's very regular use. And there's no correlation, according to them, between using cannabis that much and the inability to enjoy life's pleasures or the inability to motivate yourself to achieve something. And again, that's something that I think any of us who have been regular cannabis users and have incorporated it successfully into our adult lives, I think all of us would know that. And maybe you can laugh off the lazy stoner stereotype. I definitely do still get some enjoyment out of it when I see it on screen. But when somebody tries to point at that and make a real world argument for someone's lack of qualifications, or maybe insinuating that somebody doesn't have the right stuff to do something because they use cannabis, that is bullshit. That is complete and utter fabrication. And this study from Cambridge, I am guessing, my opinion here, this is just going to be the first of many proving that exact point, that there's no problems with using cannabis regularly and conducting a healthy, fulfilling, enjoyable, motivated existence on Earth. I've never bought this whole notion that you can't be a productive stoner. That is not an oxymoron. That is what describes hundreds of thousands of people across the world, if not millions, every day of the week, in my mind. So I just felt like sharing that headline with you, listener. As I said, I'll share that article on the show's socials, and I'm going to reach out to somebody who authored the study, or one of those who, one of the doctors who took part, and try and find out some more about what they did and didn't do, and what, questions are still out there and whatnot. But, again, as I say every week, listener, these kinds of studies, this kind of research, this is the kind of exciting stuff that we can all enjoy and pay attention to, and look forward to as cannabis is more normalized and more a larger and larger part of our day-to-day life. These kinds of studies are really, really important for us in figuring out how to incorporate it into our lives the best way to improve our quality of life and alleviate some of those stressors and negative things that come with the day-to-day existence here. So anyway, that's all I got for you this week. I'll be back again next week with another great guest interview and some more news and events around Illinois, and some headlines from the world of with Cannabis on the Cannabis Man podcast. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is an original production of myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music by Yusu Kim, aka Goodson. Other music by Pat Perez, and logo designed by Vorbroker Media. If you like the show, please rate, review, subscribe, and share whenever you can.